use this information more faster, better, more complete, right? And we can come back to patients with diagnoses that are appropriate, governed by human beings. So a human being is the last person who touches that. So there's always that way of, I don't agree with that, and here's why, right? And so we
Mm.
have a lot of that back and forth with the AI model, but we're trying to do that today.
Yeah, that's really good to know. And as you mentioned, as a healthcare provider, you handle some of the most sensitive data in the world, and it's actually subject to regulation and compliance. So, could you talk a little bit more on the risk appetite when it comes to the healthcare sector in general, and how you kind of approach that from the
Yeah,
information security perspective?
yeah, absolutely. So when you talk about security and, investment and controls and writing policies and things like that, it starts with understanding what your risk appetite is, right? And a lot of that has to do with what are your regulatory compliance requirements, what is your, what are the verticals that you work in, requirements like PCI compliance for credit cards. Obviously, we're a federal government entity under HIPAA, so we have protected health information. We have PII for, if it's not attached to humans from a health perspective, then it's at least PII, right? So first name, last name, date of birth, and all that fun stuff. So establishing the risk appetite, these are the bare minimum things that we are willing to not do, right? Or absolutely things we absolutely must do to protect our patients, our organization, our team members, and Wellstar as a whole. That's the appetite we have to generate. And so that's a living and breathing thing sometimes, right? A lot of people are like, it's written in stone. You're like, no, 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 no. It can be flexible. It can be malleable for depending on the instances you run into. It would be great. And sometimes we stand fast to that risk appetite. Like that's not something we're absolutely not willing to do. Case in point, patient health, right? Like if it involves negatively impacting a patient's life, there's a fair chance we're not going to do it, right? Unless it's talking about if we don't do it, it will kill the patient. Like, okay, well then I guess we have to do this because if we don't do anything, that patient will die or may die. So we do have a lot of risk understanding within our vertical from a healthcare provider, but it is something that every organization enterprise should establish.
Yeah, totally agree. I think it's not just healthcare organization, but enterprise in general kind of have to have an understanding about what is your absolute red line is, like whether it's patient health information that can negatively impact their life or like something else. Like clearly establish these boundaries are going to be critical before you kind of like decide uh, how and when and where and what to apply GenAI. So with
Right.
that said, it's a good segue to kind of understand a little bit more on like what kind of use cases that GenAI is helping you guys and kind of like what kind of measures that you are having around kind of protect these sensitive information from different type of risk when it comes to GenAI.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of use cases, right? Without use cases, you have a hard time establishing what is it you want to accomplish, what are your expectations, what makes something a success or not, what are the guardrails, right, for the project that you're working on. And so a lot of that kind of helps you establish to leadership what your intent is and also to the people who are working on the project like, hey, this is what we want to do and what we don't want to do. Let's try and stay in between the guardrails. But and this also helps to establish, as you see the shiny new toy, right? I think you and I talked about this. Wow, that's a really cool, product, application, software, whatever. You're like, that's really cool. Unless you have a use case for it, when it comes time to renew, that application license or things like that, you're gonna be like, well, I didn't really use it. I barely used it. Establishing those use cases keeps that from happening, right? The shiny new toy effect. Do I want to spend $1 million again on this same tool that I barely use? And the answer is no, you're not. Unless you have a use case, the answer is going to be no. I think what this also helps to understand is gets people on board with the mission, right? So we talking about generative AI. What do we plan on using this for? right? Or we talk about AI in general. Well, we want to establish to use it for radiation oncology to understand images that we're taking for tumorous and cancerous cells to identify within lung x-rays or MRIs, or echocardiograms, or anything that we want to post an image on and train that, right? And so we have a clear expectation of what we're looking at. We have an expectation of results. We have an expectation of what we don't want, and don't need, and what success looks like and criteria for that. So having those kinds, obviously you want to be more in depth into a use case, but having established what those things are helps you kind of guidelines for the next project and the next project. Like, hey, this was a success. What does the next one look like? What's next? So that's kind of the direction that we usually try to set forth when we talk about artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. Like getting stakeholders kind of involvement to be on board with the on a mission to not just get the benefits of Gen AI, but also kind of safeguard against the risk is super important and critical. So with that said, I know that we talk about like different Gen AI tools out there, such as Microsoft Copilot. It sounds like you also developed some kind of custom Gen AI tools there. Would you talk a little bit more on like what are your concerns when it comes to the risk, like the specific risks that you worry about when it comes to tools like such as Microsoft Copilot and other tooling
Yeah.
that is very proliferated across enterprises right now?
Right. And so when we look at generative AI, the first risk that I usually worry about is data, right? So obviously these things exist on data, right? And the more data you feed it, the better it gets, which is a positive. The problem is sometimes folks may accidentally put sensitive data, and those models may be shared publicly, right? So now it's, hey, I'm going to put in all the data I know about Mike DiRezzo and everything else. You're like, okay, that's great if it's a private Gen AI. But if it's a public Gen AI, somebody might go, tell me all the information you know about Mike DiRezzo. Well, if I just uploaded all of his PHI, suddenly that's exposed and retrievable by people. So that's my biggest concern, is how do I know what that looks like? And that's just with the public. There may be with HIPAA, there's guidance and requirements that if James doesn't have anything to do with taking care of Mike DiRezzo, the patient, James shouldn't be looking at Mike DiRezzo's health records. And there's actual HIPAA laws to protect Mike DiRezzo's data from that kind of exposure, right? You see the famous actor or something check into ER, you don't go into the enterprise medical record system and look for the famous actor who just came in to see what they're in here for, right? Like, you can't do that. That's a violation of that person's privacy. So I worry about that, right? I worry about the concerns of people aren't using it effectively and safely. So we're trying to educate folks on how to use this better, what to do, what not to do, right? And so, because this is a tool that many people have found absolutely useful, right? From the most mundane task of, I don't want to spend energy being creative on how to write this response to this letter, to show me a project plan where we can develop steps to this, like really in-depth requirements, all borderline agentic AI, asked out of these AI, generative AI modals. But that's kind of what we're trying to do, is govern the data safely, make sure exposure is not where it is today, and kind of curtail that. And if it is exposed, right, how do I pull it back? Right, what's available to me to pull that back? How do I go about reaching out to the public Gen AI models and say, hey, I noticed that this was accidentally exposed to you. I need you to retrieve it. And they may go, it's already out there. Like, we can't pull it back, or, well, we can go back into the data stores and rip it out if we need to. But that's a challenge. That's absolutely keeps me up at night for these Gen AI tools.
Yeah, definitely. I think you kind of like very correctly pointed out that at the core of it, it is powered by data, right? Whether
Yeah.
it is your public internet data or your internal enterprise data, like it's powered by data in general.
Right. Right.
And so the example that you gave about like you see a celebrity get into the ER, and it's like, oh, what is this guy in for? Or like what is doing here? Like what is going on here? And then you go into like GenAI tools like Microsoft Copilot, just ask about it, and then see,
Right.
you know, maybe you get it, and
Right.
it's a real thing because with the power of GenAI, it gets such all the underlying data. So in the past it just take a long time for you to search for things. Now you can just like a prompt like my address
Right.
or file me all information that you get in my Microsoft tenant and see what information you get. So
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest nightmare that I also heard from other customers when it comes to
Yeah.
like oversharing of the data, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not that people deliberately do it, but like they just
Right.
accidentally.
Yeah, I mean collaboration, right? Every Microsoft Office tool is geared towards collaboration now, right? Teams, absolutely correct. SharePoint, OneDrive, even within Microsoft Excel and Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, it's geared towards collaboration. So by design, sharing that data is there by default. It's an easy button to hit to share out to everybody, right? And by unfortunately by design, you're creating that potential security risk.
Yeah, definitely. And for the folks who are listening, feel free to add your question in the comments. We'll get back to you, um, and we'll answer the question at it come. But yeah, I think that's a really good point there. Um, and so I think you touched upon like different level of risk, right? From the oversharing of data to actually like if that happens and people use that data and then send it to like a public AI, and like how you go about that. Um, so I guess then you kind of mentioned about it, but like getting involvement felt
Yeah.
like one of the key things. I think you talk about like getting people on board a mission, but could you talk a little bit more on that aspect of the house? And after that, maybe we can talk more about like what kind of uh, there's a user awareness and education that is involved, but it's also
Yeah.
kind of like the best practices in terms of security guardrails and tooling. So maybe we can talk about that after talking a little bit more on the people side
Yeah.
part, which is the wicked links.
Absolutely, right? So getting involvement is absolutely key to being successful in this environment. So making sure your legal folks are aware of what's going on, right? So that they can provide you with, again, those guardrails that we talked about at the beginning of the show. If you have a compliance team, a chief privacy officer, if you live in California, for example, this is an absolute, you must get your chief compliance privacy officer involved in as soon as possible, right? And really cultivate this idea of an AI governance council, right? Like, hey, let's establish by via a group how we're actually going to use AI and make lives better and make improvements, and how we're not going to use it as a group. We decide how we're not going to use it, and really give guidance for how this is going to be established. This is a lot better than people, what I call cowboy cowgirling their way into, oh, we're going to use AI and it's going to make the world better. And you're like, that leads to Skynet. Let's back that up a little bit. Let's make sure that everybody's aware of what's going on, because not everybody is on the charge full speed ahead kind of path when it comes to artificial intelligence. And then you talked about, like, lunch and learns, right? Getting that level set of people, because in my experience, and I am trying to consume as much as possible of information. I was talking about earlier. I try as much as I can, and yet I still walk into conversations and I learn something new every day, right? And it's like cybersecurity 15 years ago. Man, I just learned, so I just turned into a sponge and I try to learn everything I can, right? How does that control work? What are we looking at? Um, so we're running lunch and learns to kind of level set everybody out there, because one, I want the people who are leading the charge for artificial intelligence to know and understand how to use this safely and securely, right? How not to set their own selves up for disaster or risk or anything else, our patients and the company as a whole. And I want the people who are left behind, right? Because not everybody is using AI. People are like, I don't want to use AI. I really don't want to. Like, this is a new technology, right? 20 years ago, people were like, what's the cloud? I don't understand what the cloud is. It sounds like a computer plugged in somewhere else. And so people avoided it. And what happened is there was a gap. It started creating a gap in people who adopted it and people who are left behind. And I really don't want that to happen. I really feel like this is a catalyst for humanity, right? We're on the cusp of a next generation, a new age of technology, as it was with AI and quantum computing. Once that gets released and activated, with those two technologies will accelerate humanity, right? Hopefully in a good way, but it will accelerate humanity. Hopefully not towards our destruction,
Not
but
the
in that way.
Skynet.
So I was right. I don't, another Skynet reference. But I really, I try to make sure that the folks that are not like, I don't understand what it is. Because what we've all noticed is, when Chat GPT came out 2, 3 years ago, right, there was a huge adoption. People were using all kinds of Chat GPT, and man, this is great. And what happened is that we provided these folks with use cases like, hey, here's 20 things you could use with Chat GPT, and everybody used all 20 of them. And then once everybody used all 20 of them, they're like, well, now what? And so utilization kind of declined. And I've seen people who are leading edge, like they get it. They're so connected to it. They use Chat GPT or Copilot or other generative AIs for the craziest things. Like, what are you working on today? And I gave somebody an example, Dennis. I gave him an example and he typed in his phone and it shot out like 16 pages worth of text. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's great, but I want to be the creator of that. Selfishly, I want to be the creator of that. But but folks like me who are kind of still behind, not using it, not on I'm trying to get us moving forward. So how do I do that? It's getting involvement, getting people aware, sometimes pulling them along, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think you kind of highlighted the challenge there, right? Like you want to be at the forefront of the technology so that you can safeguard the
Yeah,
security. But the thing is, the Gen AI is like moving really fast. Like things keep changing on a daily basis.
yeah,
And I think the second piece that the kind of hard is that, as you mentioned, a lot of times security have to depend on the end users to make sure the system is secure, right? For example,
right,
like uh, the lunch and learn session that you mentioned, like it's a good opportunity to educate them. Like maybe you don't set your SharePoint as a public group, for example. Like
right,
maybe you do not upload this PHI file, or like you don't set this file into like an organization wide link so that everyone can get access to it, because it's a general, right? So it's a lot easy for people to search. But you're absolutely right. Like security need to be by the folks on the ground, end users. So that's why it's very important to engage them
yeah.
early on and frequently.
Yeah. And frequently. Yeah, absolutely. Keeping them up to date. Um, yeah. So it's a challenge, right? It's and everybody does it. I've seen some organizations, like some of the investment companies are like, we've been using it for 5, 6 years. And you're like, what? You've been using what for 5, 6 years? Like, oh my gosh. And they're like, oh, we've got this, we've got the scars, and oh, you don't want to go down that path. And you're like, holy cow, you guys are really advanced. And then I've got other people who are in the back of the room are like, what's chat gpt? And you're like, yeah, i I feel it, like, and that happens, right? That happens with every new technology, right? Cloud, SaaS applications, you name it. It is databases. Heck, I remember databases, structured query languages, like this is great. And then it was NoSQL, and you're like, what's a NoSQL? And you're like, MongoDB, and you're like, well, how do you use that? And you download it. Let's play with it, right? And but not everybody downloads it and plays with the new technology, and that's a big challenge. So I always ask people, like, what are you using nowadays? How are you using it? What's that look like? Because I really want to know. I really want to embrace this and not get left behind, right? I don't
Yeah,
want to be the dinosaur.
I think that's important, right? Like every enterprises are in a rush right now. No, it's just not just at the human level, but also at the
Yeah,
enterprise level. Like
yeah,
no one wants to left behind.
right.
I have a very interesting conversation with a law firm who is trying to adopt Gen AI, but concerned about data privacy, but they also
Mm,
concerned about hallucination. But
mm,
regardless, like they see all the talk about Gen AI and how it's like a new electricity that's kind of like
yeah,
horizontally upgrade the humankind. And now it's like, yeah, but how do I do that
right.
safely and securely? Is a big thing.
Yeah, very big thing. Well, and you mentioned the hallucination. Like, we all laugh because most of us have heard the story of the law student who, or the attorney who used generative AI to come up with the briefing and everything else, and it invented all these court cases, right? That never existed. Like, what court case is this? And the judge was like, that's not a real court case. Where did you get this information from? And you're like, oh, that's terrible. Like, that's you're gonna get this barred for that one. Yeah, and it's kind of, we talk about policy, right? So,
Mm,
like, using it securely and getting that done and pulling that together, and where do you establish your policy from? And that comes from all the other previous points. What's your risk appetite, right? What are your use cases? What And is everybody involved? Because everybody's going to have a different opinion, because what's important to them. And so getting that artificial intelligence policy, that first one out there, don't don't make it all encompassing. It'll never be all encompassing, right? Make it open enough, like the Constitution, that it's open for interpretation and susceptible to amendments. And amendments in this case are would be like a Gen AI policy, right? Or a large language model investment policy, small language model investment policy, or just things that kind of still allow for the main AI policy to dictate, these are the rules of senior leadership, the guidelines, and then the policy kind of dives down a little bit deeper into how you should use this effectively and safely. But that's kind of like how we're driving things along, and there are people who are
Yeah.
much more advanced and much further along than we are, and I reach out to those folks, right? Like, tell me about how you gained the scar tissue for this, right? And they're like, yeah, here's what happened. We got this team involved and it turned out really badly. Why did it turn out really bad? Well, we didn't communicate enough. We over communicated, right? And people just disconnected because they're like, it's too much information. I'm out. I'm just going to go do my own thing. So it's a good balance.
Yeah, I totally agree, right? I think you don't want to kind of annoy people with like keep
Right.
talking about Gen AI, but like
Right.
like I'm not using it on daily basis. Like why
Right.
do I have to hear all about this?
Right.
Um, so I think you kind of touched a good point in that there is a good intention behind policies, then
Yeah.
there is the execution part of it, which is that
Right.
these communications, but also in terms of the guardrail to ensure that, right? Like I know that some of the tools, like out of the box tool, like Copilot and stuff, like they take care of a lot of issues, right? In terms of
Mm.
abusing of the system, right? Like prompt injection, model poisoning, and all of that fancy stuff. Like if you
Yeah.
try to crack that, like the out of the box model, like at least from the Microsoft or Google side, they already kind of have the ability to block it. But surprisingly, I found like something like super simple, like just like, hey, find the celebrity name in the system and see if you get access to that.
Right.
Extremely effective, but it's also extremely hard
Right.
to kind of actually cap detect it and block it. And so with that said, I think that from the policy standpoint, like what kind of policy that you have in that regard, and how do you enforce it in a way, and how you kind of detect and making sure you correct behaviors when that happens?
Yeah, so we have a few things that we've invested in, a few tools, and there's a lot of different tools out there. But having so the policies kind of establish the what we need to do and what we need to cover, the investment and the processes, right? What kind of processor we need? What do we need to do this? Well, we need to understand who's doing what, right? So okay, let's establish you need a use case in order to use generative AI or AI. Fantastic. What engine are you using? Well, I'm going to use, Huggy Face. You're like, okay, well, you're going to use LM Studio. You're going to use whatever. We're going to build it in house. Like, okay, that's good. What data are you going to use? Right. And this is important because it has regulatory requirements attached to it sometimes. So if it's patient data, is it de-identified patient data, pseudonymized, whatever, however you want to make sure that you don't get sued or fined? How are you doing that, or arrested? How are you doing that? Right. So those kind of things are the three that I call my must-haves. Right. What's your reason? What's the technology? What's the data? Right? And from those three things, I can divine out or identify what my requirements are. Right? Both from a project perspective, what are you expecting at the end of the day? Is it ethical? Right? Is it ethical to ask these questions? Is Are we going to create a hallucination by ethical issues? And then can we do this legally? Right? So are there data sets that we're going to create that may violate a privacy law somewhere, or some kind of regulation or things like that? And those are the kinds of things that we drive with. And so there's tools like Model Op and things like that that kind of help workflow,
Mm,
right? And people are like, oh, it's a workflow. And you're like, no, 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 no. Like, it's not just a normal singular string serial workflow. There are a
mm,
lot of parallels in this workflow, right?
mm,
It's not just a simple let's identify this and move forward. You're like, not only do you need to manage and maintain these approvals, right? These requests, these approvals, these visibility points, but you need to maintain it because it's not a single point in time, right?
right.
AI engines go on and on. They
Mm,
change, right? They modify, right? It's Zubius 1, it's Zubius 2 in a week. And you're like, what's the difference between Zubius 1 and Zubius 2? You're like, I don't know. I just made up the word. It's, you know, could be a lot, could be nothing. Well, did the data change? Well, kind of. And you're like, well, who approved that? And so, you know,
Yeah,
that's, you need this really strict kind of requirements and gathering and review portion. And
yeah.
that takes scar tissue, right? You need to argue this out. So we started with examples, right? We're starting with examples now of,
Mm,
okay, let's just throw out an example and test it. And people are, you know, we're going to argue about things. We're going to have real things, but those arguments are the things that set precedents, right?
mm,
And we need that precedence to understand, you know, hey, how'd you arrive at that? Well, I arrived at that because my interpretation of risk appetite is here.
mm.
Oh, my risk appetite interpretation is down here. Like, okay, well, why? Let's level set and pull that in. But if we pull all that together,
Yeah,
everybody has an understanding, right? And I want to be supportive of the people that want to push the envelope safely, right? I want people to build amazing things, right?
mm,
Humans are capable of creating magnificent, amazing things that can be used for destruction, right?
mm.
And so my job is to make sure we don't get to that destruction point.
Yeah. I think that the way that I think about it, it's like fire, right? You can use
Yeah.
it to cook foods and keep yourself warm, and you can use it, for
Yeah.
malicious purposes, like
Absolutely.
harm other people. So it's like probably the same way with Gen AI.
Sure.
It's just that Gen AI is a lot more dangerous because of the speed and the scale and the impact that they could have. Right,
Right.
like if it is a
Right.
fire, it's just like your kind of geography limited to that area. But like when it comes to Gen
Right.
AI, it's
Global.
like it's global. It's so
Yeah.
fast.
Yeah.
Um,
In minutes, right? In minutes, it could be globally a phenomenon. Yeah. Oof.
yeah, yeah, and definitely, definitely. So with that said, what advice would you have for security professionals who just get started on kind of the journey of securing and protecting Gen AI? And I guess
Yeah.
then you can touch by two things there, right? So it sounds like there are custom built AI applications, and then
Yeah.
there's out of the box AI
Right.
application. And I know that you guys are quite a bit of a heavy users when it comes to Copilot and stuff like that. So if I'm a new security, I'm not new, but like if I'm a security professional who want to kind of help my organization to embark on the Gen AI journey, then what
Yeah.
what advice would you have, and how would you think that people should approach this?
Yeah, and so just touching back on the previous points, it's get people involved, right? Get the people that are going to be detractors involved, especially like, man, I hate talking to that person. You're like, that's the person you want to talk to, right? You know, I talk about hiring people that are gonna tell you the truth, even though you don't want to hear it, right? Because you really everybody needs somebody who tells you the truth, right? Like you don't want to be, oh, that's a great idea. Like that's a terrible idea. And here's why. And you're like, that's why I keep him or her around because they're honest with you, right? So invite those detractors, invite the people that are probably going to be challenging, right? You'll get, you know, one, you'll get better at managing people, but two, you'll get a real good sense because once you get everybody into alignment and an agreement, you feel confident that you have created something worthwhile, right? If you have that detractor suddenly now on your side, you're like, holy cow, I can't believe I got person X to agree with me. Like this is if they agreed with me, then the logic is sound, right? Like we've created something that's amazing. So you know, find those people, be collaborative, right? As much as it hurts sometimes, and it hurts creativity, it stunts creativity sometimes with collaboration. It can also help you from shooting yourself in the foot. So absolutely collaborate with people, communicate, right, and understand who's this interested in this, right? So when I talk projects internally, it's like, is there anybody out there who wants to be a part of this? I know this might not be in your role, but do you want to be a part of this?
Mm,
Because this may be a kickoff point to something in your role, right? And now
mm,
you've cut your teeth on this project. You can go and build your own project and pull somebody else in, right? And so now you're not just being collaborative,
mm,
you're kickstarting people, right? You're
mm,
getting people off, right? So you're an amazing person when it comes to artificial intelligence. You know so much about it, and
mm,
I don't know enough, right? Or I feel like I don't know enough. I'll
mm.
go, hey James, can I help you with that? Can I can
Yeah,
can I be participate? Can I at least listen in? I mean, I won't talk in the conversation. You're like, no, let's talk about it. Let's get this together. Um, be welcoming to those folks, right? Bring on
mm,
people because they're the ones of the future, right?
mm.
And we're all on journeys. We're all just at different points of the journey. But those are the two things: collaborate, bring people along you with you on the journey.
Yeah, I feel like that's so important. Personally, I talk to a lot of folks, a lot of security professionals trying to adopt Gen AI. And to your point about, you know, getting people on board is so critical, right? Because at
Mm,
the end of the day, if no one is using Gen AI tools, it's there's
yeah,
no justification for you to
right,
spend money and time and efforts on that. At the same time, if people are too enthusiastic and use it in the wrong way,
right,
you also kind of doomed because we got into a
right,
situation we got into a situation where a customer of ours have to block the entire Copilot deployment just because someone was very enthusiastic in testing the tools and they found the things that they're not supposed to find, but they get access to, and it get uh, it get into like a lot of trouble from the legal
right,
standpoint.
right,
And I think to your point, the third point, which is that once you build this champion among the early adopters within the enterprise, then that champion is like a beacon signal that can go and influence other people in the company. It's like, hey, I use this for my work. It's improved my if productivity. It's like maybe you should use too, right? Like
right,
you will not become the only voice in the
right.
company
Yeah.
that is talking about Gen AI, but you have allies in a way.
You're the catalyst, right? You're the person that gets other people to use this new technology. Yeah, I mean that's great. That's
Yeah.
magic, right? That's the moment. Like everybody gets a paycheck, but there are moments
Mm,
in your life and your career that everybody should have when you are a part of that and somebody else, right? It's
yeah.
or you experience that and you share that with other folks. It's magic. It's absolutely human Homo sapien magic right there. So it's yeah, definitely bring people along with you on the journey.
Yeah, definitely. And I know you kind of don't agree with that, but you you guys actually one of the more advanced healthcare providers
Oof.
in the adoption of Gen AI. I would say,
Yeah, yeah.
I've seen a lot of spectrums, and I know that you kind of don't agree with that, but you guys are. I mean,
I
everyone feel like they're a little bit behind because like there's
yeah.
so much high going on there. It's like I'm behind, but you,
Oh yeah.
not so much. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It's relative, right? It's relative. I think I'm well behind because I've seen other people who are like, man, we're right on the cusp of creating, and you're like, holy man, I just
what
created the
is that?
policy 2 months ago, right? Like yeah, it's kind of amazing. It's kind of amazing where people are in the journey, but it's relative, right? And,
Yeah,
you can leverage other peers to jump and catch up, right? Not everybody has to gain all the scars. You don't have to get all the tattoos and all the shirts for your journey. Like you can listen and learn from other people's journeys. Like, oh, that didn't work out well. Why is that? Well, okay. Well, hey guys, don't do that. This guy says we shouldn't do it, and why? But yeah, it's an amazing journey. Where I
yeah.
this is a great time to be alive to understand this part of history and this part of technology. Like I guarantee you, this is a cusp of an age for humanity.
Maybe building on top of that, right? What are your predictions about Gen AI in general and in healthcare? Like, what are your, that there's this famous fortune teller, Vanguard from Bulgaria, that can predict like 200 to 300 years in the
Yeah,
future.
yeah.
Um, what is that version of Mike Terrazzo? Like, what are your predictions about Gen AI and Gen AI in healthcare, and where do you see this is going?
So I think Gen AI is the starting point, right? I feel like agentic AI is really going to push the boundaries now, right? So instead of creating very simple requests that are generated, we're going to invest more in agentic AI to start things. And I tell people, my acronym, whether it's right or wrong, is generative AI is, it's you taking a bucket of water, dipping it into a water source, and that's your bucket, right? Agentic AI helps you build a bucket and then helps you find the water source and helps do all this thing when all you asked is, I need to create a steady source of water flow back to my home. Agentic AI is going to, once we get that, will really push the boundaries here, coupled with, quantum computing and things like that, that we're also quite near in the next decade or so. Um, all of these technologies that we're developing today, they are the beginning, right? They're not even the one thing that we're going to be like, man, this is amazing. You're like, think about cars 120 years ago, right? They had 8 horsepower, right? And their top speed was 10 miles an hour. You're like, that's amazing. You're like, bro, I can hit 10 miles an hour on my driveway. And it's not a very long driveway, right? Like, I take my foot off the brake and we can be at 10 miles an hour. But it's things like that we're
Yeah.
just on the cusp, and it's Moore's law, right? Where it's going to get faster, better, cheaper,
Yeah.
more available to more people. And that's when we're really going to hit the excitement point, right? Like
Mm.
10, 15 years ago, cloud was like, this is amazing. And you're like, wait for it, right? Because no one's going to have a data center in 10 years, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what I feel like. And
Mm.
that could even be impacted. SaaS applications could even be impacted by Gen
Right.
AI and AI in general. You're like, I don't need an
Yeah.
application anymore. I
Mm.
just ask the modeling system to develop the output that I need.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Right? Boom. Holy cow. What do you mean I don't need applications anymore? Like, I don't need workflows anymore. I
Yeah.
can just create an agentic AI to build out and deliver and execute on the things that I ask. Why do I need a workflow?
Right. It's
Approvals
a
built
it's
into
a
it.
it's a natural language interface. You can just
Right.
tell commands and it do everything in the backend, connecting to
Right.
databases, like
Right.
working on what you want, as like coordinating between multiple applications. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And along that lines, 30, 40 years down the road, I don't need humans anymore. No. Stop. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Skynet,
But
Skynet, Skynet the
can it,
coming.
can it, can it, can it.
Uh,
But that's I feel like we're right now, we're on that cusp, and it's
yeah.
exciting. It's absolutely
So
exciting.
so drawing to the parallel that you made about cloud, like 15 to 20 years ago, there's a lot of excitement on the cloud. And then when there's enough attackers or hackers that got into the cloud, like things like,
Right.
oh my gosh, now like traditionally I put everything in on premise, things are safe and secure. I have my network
Right.
router that kind of like inspect every traffic and kind of seeing what come in, what come out.
Right.
So drawing that parallel, like okay, so we are at GenAI is where cloud was 15 or 20 years ago. Then the question is, where do you think, from the security standpoint, as a security practitioner, like what do you see there?
Yeah. So it's the same thing, right? The principles of security, right? You when you talk about the Lockheed Martin kill chain, right? Like an attack isn't fully successful unless they,
Mm,
change, delete, modify data or remove it from the environment, right? It's the same kind of
mm,
thing, right? I
mm,
can compromise every system of your environment, but if I don't get the data, if I don't change, modify, remove, delete that data, I haven't won yet, right? And all
mm,
I have to do is clip the connection and you're out again. And make sure all those connections are clipped. The problem with generative AI is the surface
mm,
attack area, right?
mm,
Is still the cloud, right? It's still the internet, it's still the environment, right? It's still the environment the model persists in at its greatest extent.
mm.
And so I still need to protect, the outgoing ports, the communication ports. I still need the authentication with it to
Yeah,
validate profiles of who's allowed to have access to the data and not.
yeah,
So I think you're going to see a lot more protection of things like, how do I keep, James asking one question, right? And this is how you and I met. James asked the generative AI one question about something, and Mike asked the same question, because we have two different profiles. You get one information, right? You get
Mm,
all the information, and I only get a small snippet of it.
mm,
Um, I think that's huge. I think that's where we're going to be, is authentication, identification of the requester,
mm,
and that's going to be challenging, right?
yeah,
Because you're gonna get AI that simulates users, right? And so now we're going to be able to ask the question, what's the difference between Mike Durezzo and Mike Durezzo, right? And that's where AI is going to break authentication, right? I really feel like that's the
yeah,
challenge. Biomedical throughput or input, like retinal scans and things like, it's all ones and zeros at a level. It's all ones and zeros,
yeah,
right? And so at some point, AI is going to break that, right? Whether we have quantum computing or not, somebody's going to figure it out.
yeah,
And that's the challenge, right? So now we're going to have to abstract some way to identify who we are, right?
yeah,
What makes James?
yeah. That is true, and I think we have to keep evolving. Just because the technology evolve, like us as a human being, we have to evolve. And the example that you gave, Michael Upsans, regardless of the technologies, at the end of the day, it's all about the data, the underlying
Right,
data, and
right,
the action that it can perform. I think maybe in the setting of a hospital, like if a doctor asking for patient health information, maybe he or she should get access to it. But let's say if a clerk who just see a celebrity getting into the hospital should not be able to in, should not be entitled to kind of get access to that information, right? I think it's all
right,
about access is kind of a little bit relative depending on who you are, and making sure that whatever um, data and technology that we have currently can adopt to the Gen AI era. Right now, like you said, it start with like single AI, but when it comes to agentic AI, the problems just get bigger and bigger, right? Like and again, it's all come down to like who the user are, what kind of data that they're trying to access. Like even though there is agentic AI agent that are acting on the user behalf, it's still there is a user that are behind all of these requests, and then who
right,
what are they entitled to. So
right.
I think with that said, any kind of final thoughts on the topic about oversharing, about Gen AI, about security? I know we talk about a lot of different contexts. We talk about
Yeah,
healthcare, Gen AI in
yeah.
healthcare, Gen AI in general,
I,
and stuff
I,
like that.
yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we're as humans, we're always two steps forward, one step back, right? And so we're gonna learn from our mistakes, and that's what makes us great. That's what makes humans really good. I won't say great. Well, and but is we learn from our mistakes usually.
Yeah,
Usually we learn from our mistakes. And I
usually.
think we need to be attentive to that, right? And
Yeah,
that's what will make us better.
yeah, definitely. I had a great time chatting with you, Mike.
Thank you so much.
So for the folks who want to reach out to Mike, there is a QR code up front that leads to his LinkedIn, so you can check him there. Um, My name is James Pham. I'm the founder of Opsin. We safeguard enterprises from data exposure risk using Microsoft Copilot. Happy to have Mike on the podcast.